Hello PLO Order, another episode. Today's topic is monotone flops and how to play monotone flops with different sizings. We don't go to the actual cards, this hand you should bet, this hand you should check, but the general strategy with different sizings and how does that affect our strategy, because monotone flops are special ones. In monotone boards, decent reps will easily spot if you have certain strategy. If we compare monotone boards to paired boards, then monotone board, no matter what the ranks of the cards are, is pretty much the same in strategy-wise. I mean, whether it's ace, jack, 7 of spades, or queen, 7, deuce of spades, the strategy doesn't change that much. But on paired boards, we could have 7-7-3 rainbow, or we could have jack-jack 10 suited. Which means that, of course, in jack-jack 10 suited, certain ranges hit way better than on 7-7-3 rainbows. On paired boards, it's not that easy to spot the strategy, but on monotone boards, if you always do certain stuff, then I would say that it's the kind of board where your opponent has the easiest job to spot your strategy, which often leads to counter strategies and counter of a counter strategy and so on between reps, and it becomes leveling. So I love monotone boards because that's when you have to play poker. You just want to be one step ahead of your opponent, and you want to see how your opponent plays those monotone boards so you can do the counter strategy. But let's get started. We have a case scenario. Cutoff for the button, flop, king, 9, 5. And before we go to the GTO strategy from solver, let's open up the hand on Poker Choose and just play through. I'm going to show you something. We're the cutoff. We open, button calls, blinds fold, flop is king, 9, 5. And now, let's say, I mean, this is a strategy that I'm teaching to beginners. So they will have easy to remember strategy that works decently well. And on monotone boards and in all locked boards, bet half a pot. It's not optimal, but it's easier to bet half a pot. Solver likes to use 1/3 sizing. And we're going to discuss about that when we go to the solver strategy, but let's say half a pot. Now, if opponent folds more than 33% of hands, we start to print money. So it's quite safe option, because now, what would be average opponent's calling range on monotone boards? It depends, of course, on the stakes and sides, but let's say on small stakes, average opponent doesn't make moves on these boards often. They might make a wide call, but remember, we need to generate only 33% fold equity to print money. And here's button's calling range, which is all the flushes, all the sets, and all the 2 pairs. So if you close with flushes, sets, 2 pairs, that's quite no-brainer. Then his combined continuation range is 37. So we have over 60% fold equity. So we need to start to add a lot of stuff to his range so he would prevent us from making money. If we add any king, now he's going to call slightly over 50% of times, which means we have still 48% fold equity. And remember, we need only 33. So for him to prevent us from making money by betting half a pot, we need to add stuff so that this number goes over 67. And that would be super wide. It would mean that we won't get value for our bluffs. If we have any blockers of 1 spade, fold equity goes up. So you can be very aggressive on monotone boards if opponents don't fight back. And it's my go-to, not GTO, but GT, go-to strategy. I bet half a pot or 1/3. I often start with half a pot and see how opponent reacts. And if he keeps folding, I keep bluffing. Every time when I have a bluff, I bet half a pot. And when I have a high flush, of course. But some opponents never adjust, or they adjust by widening calling range. But as we can see, he cannot have a calling range wide enough to prevent my bluffs from being profitable. And the difference between half a pot and 1/3 sizing is that with 1/3, the opponent is probably going to call with super wide. But of course, with 1/3 sizing, we need only 20% or 25% fold equity. So to hit 25, he would need to add stuff so this number goes over 75, and that's super wide. So I would say that try half a pot, bet 1/3. If opponent folds all his air and like 9xx hands to 1/3 size, now even if he calls with 9xx, I mean, we could add here 9x, still under 75. And now whatever your hand is, you have a lot of equity. So if he keeps folding his air to 1/3, which means that if he never bluffs you, raises with the bluff, then you can print money even with 1/3 sizing. But let's focus on GTO strategy, because Solver says cutoff should bet 1/3 pot 15% of times. Very passive. And that's pretty much nut flushes and nut flush blockers and so on. Some naked queen high flushes and so on. So it's pretty value heavy, and the bluffs that Solver does is ace of spades. It plays ace of spades pretty much the same way as ace high flush most of the time. But you can see that it's very passive compared to the strategy that you can implement on small stakes. When opponents don't fight back, you can just bet everything on monotone boards and people keep folding. From my databases, the average fold equity on monotone boards is around 40%. And that's everything combined. So you can be aggressive. Problem comes when opponent knows what you're doing. And I'm going to show you how it affects our strategy if opponent is always betting. We will cover that one. Alright, let's continue our case scenario. Still cutoff versus button. And response from the button to the cutoff's GTO strategy. So remember, now cutoff is betting 15% of times, checking 85% of times. When the cutoff makes the bet, you can see that Solver's strategy is still very passive, raising only 6%. And the raises are pretty much nut flushes and nut flush blockers. That's it. It's calling a lot, 70%, and that 70%, ladies and gentlemen, that's SIP wide calling range. It has pretty much all the flushes, some ace of spades, ace of spades with two pairs. There's a lot of king X, like king jack 10 is a call. So that's really wide calling range compared to the really tight betting range, which is 15%, but that 15% is balanced. Now, if your opponent is mostly checking monotone boards, there's a high chance he's not balanced. His betting range is weighted heavily towards high flushes. So on these monotone boards, pay attention to what your opponent is doing. If the hand goes to showdown, like he bets flop, checks turn, checks reverse, he had the ace of spades, make a note. Stabs once. If he fires 3 streets with ace of spades, make a note. Triple barrels, ace blocker. If he checks ace of spades, usually at the showdown, doesn't bet, blocker bluff. So then when he does bet, you should have a pretty good idea of his range, and then you can counter that very easily. These are poker flops. You have to play poker on monotone boards. But versus that bet solver folds only 25% of times. And that's, I would say that I haven't seen a player on small stakes who would play this strategy versus 1/3 bet, raising only 6%. So here we once again see that reality is far from solver strategy in small stakes. Well, if the cutoff checks, which happens 85% of times, button stabs 43% of times. 2 out of 3 times, slightly more. So it attacks very frequently, which is kind of weird because opponent is going to check pretty much all his flushes, which are non-ace flushes. So it's very aggressive. I would say, not sure how close the actual reality is, but I'm sure that the ranges that people stab are not there. But when you check monotone flops, there's a lot of opponents who stab once. They think you're weak. So when you actually have a value hand, you can extract a lot of value from those who overfold flops. And the thing is, you don't have to be balanced if you don't like to. Especially versus opponents who are not your everyday nemesis. Because if you bet the flop they fold, they don't know what you have. They don't know how balanced your betting range is. If you check, they bet and you raise, and they fold, they don't know. Did you just check raise with high spade blocker? Did you check raise with high flush? You check call, flop call, third call check river, you bet they fold, they don't know what you had. So as long as the hand doesn't go to showdown, it doesn't really matter what you have when we think about how well opponent knows your strategy. Because the opponent knows your strategy mostly based on the hands that go to showdown. If you play on PokerStars where the HUD works, then he can see on the HUD that, okay, he raises certain flops. Or he can go to database and see that, okay, that guy, monotone boards, he check raises 70% of times. And then he can pick up your strategy, but most opponents don't do that. Most opponents don't have enough hands, and most sides you just can't do that. So as long as the hand doesn't go to showdown, you can do whatever you want, and it's really hard for an opponent to know exactly what you're doing. Alright, let's say that flop sizing is 50%. So we deviate from GTO strategy, and we say that if we bet the flop, we want to use only half a pot sizing. And I made simulation on King 9-5 monotone, where the only option is to either check or bet half a pot. And here's what happens. Cutoff with half a pot bet, now he bets 28% of times. It was 15 earlier, so now it goes up almost twice as much. So bigger sizing, more fold equity, more betting. And the response to that one is fold 38%, so almost 2 out of 5 times it's a fold, and call 62 and never raise. Remember that versus 1/3 sizing there was 6% raise, but now when opponent bets half a pot, solver doesn't raise. We don't have a raise range. But the fold equity goes up with the sizing and it folds 38%. Which is kind of weird, because when betting half a pot, if opponent folds more than 33%, we're printing money. And now solver wants to fold 38%. It's probably the rate that affects that one quite a lot. Then if the cutoff checks instead of betting half a pot, remember that versus 1/3 sizing, now this strategy was around 43.57. Now it's 25.75. So if opponent uses half a pot sizing with balanced range, then when he checks, solver doesn't stab that often. So now we can see that even if the opponent plays balanced poker, if his go-to sizing on the flop is monotone board is half a pot, it means that when he checks, you don't stab that often. Because what happens here is when he bets more often. Which means that then when he checks, the range is way different than with 1/3 sizing. And what happens if cutoff bets close to 100%? I run sims where I tried to force the cutoff to bet 100% of his range, but solver just doesn't want to do that. I got real close around 95, 96%, so we can simplify things and say that he bets always. Because that 4% is so little, it doesn't really change the strategy. So let's say the cutoff is aggressive player who bets 1/3 or half a pot on monotone boards always. He bets 100% of his range, which, as seen in poker choose, is actually viable strategy unless you know better. It's currently plus EV strategy. So if you don't know how to play monotone boards, it's definitely a starting point. But when cutoff is forced to make 1/3 sizing always, then button strategy changes a lot. It folds only 11%. So it means that almost 9 out of 10 the button continues. And it mostly continues with calling. There's 18% raising. There's a lot of sets, high flushes, ace of spade blockers. And some king 9 with additional equity, pretty much to just protect the top 2 pair. And if the cutoff is forced to bet half a pot, this is now my beginner strategy that some people follow. You might have encountered that on the tables and wonder how should we play if opponent always bets half a pot. Now here's a solver solution for that. Fold 22%, raise 15, close to same raising range, but just folding some of the weaker hands, but still folding very little. Just don't give up. Floating, bluffing, semi-bluffing, you name it. If you keep folding, the opponent keeps printing, so don't do that. And now, as we ran through those pies, you probably don't remember most of them, so I will save you the effort of going back and making notes. We're going to compare different situations so it's easier to remember. Now here's a comparison when the c-bet is unforced, which means that the opponent bets solver strategy, which was these frequencies. If we use 1/3 sizing, we bet 15%. If we use half a pot sizing, we bet 28%. So 15, you can round it up to 15, 30, and just, if we bet half a pot, we have to bet a little more if we want to be balanced. And then, when we compare things with 1/3 sizing from the button perspective. Now, if cutoff is using 1/3 sizing, and you are on the button, so your opponent is betting 1/3 on monotone boards, then versus unforced, which means he is playing passively, but when he does bet, he's bet 1/3. He's balanced. This is our strategy versus that. We raise a little, call a lot, fold 25. If the opponent bets 100% of his range with 1/3 sizing, here it said forced 1/3 bet, then we can see that folding comes down a little. We fold only the crappiest of the crappiest hands. We raise 3 times more, 18%, and then call with the rest. So a lot more raising going on because opponent's c-betting range is so damn wide. And the same thing, comparison versus 50% sizing, half a pot sizing, versus unforced c-bet. We found 38, call 62. We never raise versus half a pot if he's balanced. But when we compare that to the opponent who always bets half a pot, my beginners, here's your strategy versus them. Now we start to raise 15%, and that 15% is quite a lot. Of course, you raise nut flushes, you could raise nut flush blockers. I would say when we raise ace of spades, it's not, of course, Solver raises it because he wants to represent nut flush, and that way he can have balance in his raising range. In reality, in small stakes, I would say never raise ace of spades on monotone board, on that king 9-5 board. Never raise ace of spades and hope that opponent folds a flush. Because someone to fold a flopped flush, the chances are so damn small in small stakes. You will see people making call down with any flush, any straight. I mean, even sets make a call down on monotone boards. The way we are using that ace of spade blocker is when we have ace of spades, then it's less likely that opponent has a flush. And the tighter his preflop range is, the more powerful the blocking effect is. Let's say if opponent only plays Broadway cards, and then board is king 9-5, and we have ace of spades, there aren't that many Broadway spades in the deck. And even if he has one of them, he needs to have another spade, so the chance is very low. That's why those high spade, Broadway spades are great blockers, because it improves the fold equity when we are bluffing. So those are the hands we want to raise with. We don't have showdown value with queen of spades XX or ace of spade XX. We can raise and just generate a lot of fold equity. So here's the video. Once again, slightly less than half an hour. We don't have time. I mean, if we could go, or we would go to the actual hands, what is our calling range, what is our raising range, and then in different scenarios, this would be a 5-part series with 1-hour videos. And if you're interested into seeing like what is our raising range actually versus 100% half a pot bet, then say it on the Discord. We could do live stream about it. We could do one extra video about it. But you just gotta ask. Remember, on PLO Order, you are the member. You can ask whatever. My job is to produce it. So I'm here for you guys and girls. So make sure, if you want to know more, you want to get deeper, let me know and we will work on it. But I hope this video gave you some ideas on monotone boards and what kind of strategy we can, because on monotone boards you can be very successful with very different strategies. You can be very successful with solver strategy, 1/3 sizing passive on the flop. You can be very successful with aggressive strategy, bet half a pot with your whole goddamn range. Opponents keep folding, you print money, and everything between. And I would say that, as in any scenario, it's good if you have more than one strategy and you know how to adjust. You know how to play monotone boards versus passive coin stations. You know how to play monotone boards versus aggressive maniacs. And you know how to play monotone boards versus good wrecks. And then you can find the suitable tool depending on the job you have at hand. Don't autoplay monotone boards same way versus everyone, because that's not optimal either. Alright, I'm Kuberi. This was PLO Order video about monotone boards. I will see you on the next video. Keep the galaxy safe. Thanks and bye bye.